take advantage of the fact that, in case you don't know, the Cayuga Lake Watershed Network has its office not only on campus, but in this building. So Molly and Liz are great resources for you for information and resources about lake water quality, Cayuga Lake water quality. So today Liz is going to give you an update on the watershed work to improve, to support research work, but also to support advocacy about preserving water quality. So Liz Kreitinger took on the steward and executive director role for the Cayuga Lake Watershed Network in early 2022. She's an environmental scientist by training, and her past professional experience includes working for the U.S. Geological Survey in environmental consulting, and she holds a Bachelor of Science and Master of Science degree from the Department of Natural Resources and the Environment at Cornell University. Woo! While at Cornell, she loved working with undergraduates while teaching field biology and intro ecology courses. Her graduate research at Cornell explored nitrogen cycling in forested watersheds through a collaboration with the U.S. Forest Service in New Hampshire and Southeast Alaska. Maybe you were there at the same time. Who knows? I started there. Liz grew up in the fields, forests, and creeks of the Cayuga Lake watershed. Now she's passionate about working with our communities to sustainably manage and protect freshwater resources. During her free time, of which she has almost none, she can be found outside bicycling, skiing, or kayaking, enjoying all that our watershed has to offer. I'll be welcome, Liz Kreitinger.
Thanks, Marianne. Great. How's the sound on the lapel? Good? Great. Okay, thank you so much for coming. I know it is Friday. I know spring break is about to begin, but I think you are not going to regret showing up here because we have a lot of really cool stuff going on. And I think this is just going to be a really nice opportunity for all of us to huddle in and think about how we can be better stewards of our watershed, right? I've got some appreciation for this place built into this presentation. And so I think you're going to leave here hopefully a little bit inspired to take the next step with how you might want to learn more or act to protect this place. For those of you who are new or unsure about the Cayuga Lake Watershed Network, we are a 25-year-old nonprofit, community-driven, member-based nonprofit based here in the Cayuga Lake Watershed. And simply put, our mission is to advocate for the health of Cayuga Lake and its watershed in a changing world. And to do that, our vision is this network of institutions and individuals and communities all united in the protection of our region's water resources for both people and nature, right? So what does that actually look like? We do, 3 core program areas: education, community engagement, and advocacy. So we keep busy organizing 2 free community conferences each year. We do monthly e-newsletters, 2 to 4 more detailed network newsletters in print each year. You can grab a copy of that in the back if you're interested. That goes a little more into detail. And this one actually is the special 25th anniversary edition, full color. Check it out. Yep, collector's edition. And then, of course, we're connecting with people and volunteers on social media, sharing all the good work that's going on in the watershed, not just the work of our organization, because we're dealing with really complex challenges when it comes to water and land protection. And so it does take this whole community of people with their different niches that they fill in terms of what they're doing for stewardship and science and advocacy work. And just in terms of engaging with volunteers, we get people together. I'll mention more of these at the end, but through our Embrace the Lake Litter Cleanup program, Lake Friendly Living program, and HAB's harmful algal monitoring and other science programs, we're just trying to get people to figure out what excites them the most, because I really think that people are most effective, when they find just that piece of this big puzzle that gets them the most excited. Right, so while the mission kind of sounds simple, it really isn't, but we'll try to keep things clear in today's presentation. So there you have it. Cayuga Lake's watershed, about 860 square miles, and all of its subcatchments. So the network itself is a staff team of 2, so that's me and Molly here, Molly Newman, our program associate. Molly plays a really large role in our communications and community engagement programs. And we're always interested in hearing from folks, so please don't hesitate to stop by our office or drop us an email. We're not always here on campus because we are often running around to meetings in Seneca County, Tompkins County, and regionally in the Finger Lakes. But we would love to arrange a time to chat if you're curious to learn more. And while I get the title of steward, which I think is very cool, it's not just me, right? There's opportunities for everyone to be stewards of our watershed. And it's not just me and Molly, right? We do have interns during the summer, and we are also largely able to do what we're doing because of volunteers and members and businesses and other organizations that we collaborate with, and just the engaged community that is supporting our work. I just want to give a shout out to our board of directors. You know, if anyone, like as a student, is interested in learning more about nonprofits and learning more about how to go in a direction where you're, you know, volunteering in a way that's really impactful for an organization, start paying attention to nonprofit boards, because that's something you can really grow into. Many are looking for younger voices and experiences, and some have junior boards. We don't at this time, but I would love to. That would be really, really fun. And so it's something I didn't realize until I started this position, but they're really important sort of keystone places and folks in our community. And they help us do a lot of the work, so we love that. Okay, and just a little context of the expansiveness of the network of organizations that we're dealing with here. We have, you know, state and federal agencies like the U.S. Department of Conservation, or the New York State Department of Conservation, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, lots of regional Finger Lakes organizations. There's the Finger Lakes Institute up at Hobart and William Smith Colleges, who hosts the Finger Lakes Regional Watershed Alliance. This is a really important point of connection for the regional watershed organizations across the entire Finger Lakes, right? Because we have really similar problems. Like each lake and each watershed has a little bit different things going on. But the more that there's, you know, this cross sharing of ideas, the more impactful we can be. So, you know, imagine trying to learn all of these acronyms as you dive in. I'll try to avoid them for you right now, though. Yeah, but before we get too far, like, what is a watershed, you guys? who's got a, yeah.
The territory surrounding the lake, like the shoreline?
It definitely includes the shoreline. Yeah, it can be even a little broader than that. Does anyone else have a suggestion? I want you to cue into the word shed, right? So it's not like a shed in your backyard, but this shed actually is kind of a nice little example. So a watershed is all the land upstream that drains or sheds rainfall or snow melt downhill into a water body. That's that body's watershed. So every water body has a watershed. And you can kind of think of it like, okay, on this little shed, it's got that roof, and the roof is draining down into the gutter, and the gutter is draining down into that rain barrel. And so, like, basically that's the rain barrel's watershed, is this little roof system, and the gutter is the stream. And that's the same kind of idea of how it works out in our environment. So the Cayuga Lake watershed is so 20,000 hectares. I usually say about 860 square miles. And it depends whether or not some people count the area that drains into the Seneca River at the north end, you're going to see some different numbers. And sometimes with science like this, you think, oh, like, you know, it's all straightforward. It's science, it's numbers. There's a map. You calculate an area. But there's a lot of things that are actually, you know, choices being made along the way. And so this is just one of them. It's like, do we count the Seneca River that comes into the north end of Cayuga Lake as part of its watershed or not? I mean, you can look upstream in the Seneca River and you get Seneca Lake, Cayuga Lake. So really, they're all draining in. There's not a ton of mixing of that water at the north end of our lake, though, so it just depends on the application, whether you count that or not. The watershed and lake ratio is as 12 to 1, so there's 12 times the area, surface area of watershed to lake, which actually means if you get if you got an inch of rain across the entire watershed, and it all fell at the same time, and it all flowed down into the lake would rise by 12 inches, and that could be really impactful. So when we get big rainstorms, because we have this large area of watershed relative to the area of the lake, we might, you know, be pretty concerned about flooding. And there's all sorts of systems in our lake actually that help manage the water level throughout the year. So it's manually controlled and lowered during the winter, for example. But that's just a taste of like some of the issues we're dealing with. And most of the land area of the watershed is agricultural. I just have a few maps here. You know, this is the good subcatchment map. So when we're thinking about how to manage a watershed, we look at the subcatchments and look at the land use in those subcatchments and what's going on. And it can help us, like, our science can help us understand better how to break this bigger problem down into smaller pieces. And it's pretty cool, like this Fall Creek watershed, I don't know if you can see it very well, but the darker green one that's like this big arm out to the side is the Fall Creek watershed. And that goes all the way up to Summer Hill. Like that's a really big subwatershed. And you can imagine people don't really, you know, who are living all the way up there, they're not really thinking about how their actions or activities might be impacting Cayuga Lake, right? They're way, way closer to Skinny Atlas. So this concept of a watershed actually has been pretty powerful. So for example, when fracking was coming, was coming to New York State to extract natural gas. One of the big points when the network and volunteers and staff, this was around like 2010, were working on that big problem and trying to communicate potential risks to local waters. A big part of it was just saying, like, look at this watershed, look how this is connected. Like folks down in Ithaca, you might not understand that like these areas way upstream could affect water quality down where you live, and that it's all connected. Here's just a nice example. So this is one, see the Seneca Falls at the very north end. That subcatchment's not included in this map. You know, that was a choice that was made. And this is just the land cover. And agriculture is the lightest color there. And the dark green is forested. So like down in the southern end of our watershed, you have a lot more forest cover. And just to bring this point home with these maps, that there's also over 40 municipalities that are located in our watershed. And so coordinating all those, you know, local governments to make decisions that are protective of water quality across those boundaries, because all those subcatchments, they crisscross applesauce, these boundaries, and they need to work together. So we have a partner organization called the Cayuga Lake Watershed Intermunicipal Organization, and there's a watershed manager there, and their job, we work with them and they work with municipalities to try to apply for grants, for example, for projects that cross those municipal boundaries. And very often these local municipalities don't have many staff themselves, so he has a big role in helping build capacity in that way. So we talked about upstream a little bit. looking downstream, we are part of the Oswego River, Finger Lakes Basin of Lake Ontario. And you can see that star there is just at Oswego, where the water from all of the Finger Lakes. Is there a pointer on here, actually? Yeah. All the water from the Finger Lakes drains out to Lake Ontario, which is up here. And also the Oneida River comes in. This is a very large catchment in New York State. And there we go. So that's our Finger Lakes subcatchment. And it's kind of amazing because the Great Lakes actually represent 20% of the global freshwater resources. Like we are really fortunate to be where we are in terms of access to fresh water. And if you ever want to play around with this excellent tool, this is called River Runner. It's one of my favorites. You can pick a point anywhere on a map, and it will basically take you on a journey, kind of fly over Google Maps style, to show you actually how that drop of water would flow and where it would end up in terms of its downstream watersheds. So you can drop one here in Cortland, end up in Fall Creek. I think this is just a little river segment of Fall Creek, Cayuga Lake, Seneca River, Oswego River, Lake Ontario, and then the St. Lawrence River, and then the Gulf of St. Lawrence. It's pretty neat. So you can put in your home, and see what happens, what watershed you're part of. Right, and so here's our big Finger Lakes, Lake Ontario landscape. And it's just really hard to overstate how important these freshwater resources are and how that landscape, right, controls the quality of the water that's moving downstream, right? So 200 years ago, 400 years ago, much more of the landscape was covered in forest, right? And then European colonizers came, and the landscape changed pretty quickly. Like as forest was lost, instead of rain falling and interacting with all this complex vegetation, and getting soaked into the organic, rich soil, a lot of that was removed, and it started to kind of drastically change what was happening in our lakes. And then, of course, today it looks really different, right? And there has been a lot of rebound in forest cover in the Northeast. I forget the numbers, but I think it's back up to 60% or something in New York State, which is really good, right? A lot of that land that's been cultivated in the past, is now slowing water down and slowing it down and keeping material like soil up in the landscape instead of ending up in our lakes. But a lot of our landscape is cultivated. Agriculture is developed, and we need these systems to get by, right? So it's figuring out what the balance needs to look like. And it's also like the agricultural landscape here is really closely held in our identity, right? Like there is a nice feeling you get when you are driving into Aurora and you get those big vistas of Cayuga Lake, right? And that's like a lot of that is because we have cleared the land. It's supported families for many generations. And it's important. It's important to figure out how to do it in a way that supports lake health in a much stronger way. And there's a lot going on, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. Does anyone know what this is? Barcode. No, so this is called climate stripes. If you go to #climate stripes on Google, it's a project out of University of Edinburgh, and this is the changing average temperature in New York State over, since 1859. And on this page, you can look at it. You can look at it at the global scale, and you can zoom down to the state level and all sorts of areas in the world. And the point here is that besides the changing landscape, we have a changing climate, and the water is falling faster and heavier in larger rainstorms. We're experiencing droughts in between. And so all these things are interacting. It's not just like a one-size-fits-all solution to help protect our watershed. The other thing is invasive species, which I'm not even going to get into that much today. But it's not an easy fix, right? And we need to do everything we can to make the watershed more resilient to these larger scale changes, right? If we can reduce the pollution that's going into the lake now, it's going to help the ecosystem, the organisms, the resources we depend on from being as negatively impacted as they might be otherwise. Right? Because the global climate change is just supercharging our water cycle. And there's those bare soils, right? The heavier that rains fall, especially if they're falling on wet soils that can't absorb the rain already, the faster it's going to flow off. Whereas if you have nice vegetated drainages, you're going to retain a lot of that soil and a lot of the nutrients that are causing problems downstream on the landscape. And that's good for everyone. Farmers want that too. Another interesting thing is that these roadside ditches are a really under-recognized factor because they just serve as pipes from the landscape, right? So whereas before you maybe have a field drains into a stream, the stream is kind of complex and can trap and store and cycle nutrients and things that would otherwise be pollutants entering the lake. Now we're just like shuttling right down the hill into the lake or right down the hill into a stream. And so there's a lot of issues with this, but also a lot of opportunity because it is one of the more straightforward things that we can work on to like replumb the watershed and keep more pollution up out of the lake. Right, so this is kind of what we know. Here's Yager Creek. I don't know if the light in here is good enough that you can tell. This is just like chocolate milk, right, coming out of our watersheds. This is just north of Wells College. And this is the south end of the lake, an aerial view of Stewart Park at Ithaca. And this part of the lake is recognized as an impaired water body, right? Because of these challenges that we have with sediments flowing into it and the phosphorus that comes in. Now, phosphorus, of course, it's a nutrient that's essential for all life. But in excess, it causes a lot of issues with the ecosystem. And there was a really good talk recently by Dan Egan, who did a seminar for the Finger Lakes Land Trust. And I think that will be posted. I think the recording will be posted, but it's called The Devil's Element because phosphorus just has this really interesting history of use and overuse by humans. So we're still figuring it out. And we care about too much nutrients, too much phosphorus, all these things, getting the lake out of balance because we have this amazing ecosystem here, right? Just the biodiversity in itself. Here's some of our native fishes. We've got the amazing ospreys that are returning to Cayuga Lake, which are a really cool sentinel of like when humans have done good things to fix problems we have caused. So ospreys were extricated, lost from the region as a result of DDT, which is a powerful pesticide that caused thinning in eggshells of ospreys. And if you read Silent Spring, this is the story. Ospreys are part of that. But laws have been passed, right? Laws have been passed. We've mitigated a lot of the damages that have been done and are creating this awesome habitat for these birds to return. And so we have the power to turn things around, but we need good science and good management to make it happen. And in communities who really are willing to show up and speak up for this, this environment. I recommend this field guide to the Cayuga Lake region, just if you want to get to know your watershed neighbors here a little bit better. And then for another look, if you haven't read Braiding Sweetgrass, that's another really fantastic book for a different take on it, understanding our biodiversity and ecosystem better. It says, only when we can hear the languages of other beings will we be capable of understanding the generosity of the earth and learn to give our own gifts in return, right? So there's different ways of approaching this, and I think understanding the stories of our relationship with the land and everything is, really important that we're doing that along the way. And there's signals of big challenges right now. So it's not just like, oh, we think this is happening. Like, does anyone know what these photos are of? Nice, cyanobacteria. Oh, that's good. You got stepped one ahead of me. So commonly called harmful algal blooms. They're not actually algae. They are cyanobacteria, this ancient prokaryotic, organism, bacteria that has consumed the chlorophyll. Someone said it? Yeah, nice. So that's why they look green. But these are the result of a stressed ecosystem. There's the changing climate and precipitation patterns and temperature. There's increased phosphorus, which is the limiting nutrient for cyanobacteria blooms in our lake, and then also invasive species, which are an important part of the story, but I'm not going to get into them today. But the invasive mussels in Cayuga Lake change the dynamic of the microorganisms in the lake. They are smart enough not to eat these things because they know they're toxic. The mussels will be filter feeding and yum, 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 eating all the other fun little things, phytoplankton, zooplankton, whatever. And then they get a cyanobacteria and they spit it right out because they're toxic. They, especially microcystis, which is a really common cyanobacteria in our lake, creates microcystin, which is a liver toxin, and is really the biggest both public health and ecological issue that we're dealing with right now. And this hasn't happened in our lake yet, but there are warning signs happening from our neighbors over at Owasco Lake. So this graph quality isn't super high, but it is from the Cayuga County Health Department, and it shows the change in microcystin level in the raw water that they're drawing from Owasco Lake since 2017 to 2022. And okay, so first you'll notice this has increased very quickly. And also, it's hitting 20 micrograms per liter. So the New York State Department of Health safe limits for public drinking water are less than 3.3 micrograms per liter. So we are 2 orders of magnitude too high here. This is raw water, so they haven't treated it yet. And the city of Auburn has installed carbon filters that will help deal with this, and they're constantly managing that during the summer, especially during these peaks. But even these levels are threatening to exceed our capacity to treat microcystin. Now you have a really potentially large public health issue. And there's other related issues in the water quality too, but even at 0.4 micrograms per liter, that's our contact recreation limit. So for swimming, that will cause issues also. And then the New York State defines a bloom with high toxins as 20 micrograms per liter near the lake shore and 10 out in open water. So we're in trouble here. And it's those 3 interacting challenges that we're focused on. So what time is it? 20 minutes? Okay, great. So I'm going to get a little into the science and stewardship aspect. Now that you have the scene laid out, there's 2 programs that I want to highlight, and they're at pretty different scales. So one is the Citizen Statewide Lake Assessment Program, or CSLAP, which has the most fun acronym out of all the acronyms I get to use. And then the Cayuga Lake HABS Monitoring Program, which is a locally run program by organizations and community members in the Cayuga Lake Watershed. So CSLAP is really cool. CSLAP is one of the longest running continuous volunteer monitoring programs in the nation. So New York State decided a long time ago that they wanted to start monitoring quality in all the lakes across New York State, or as many lakes as they could get. And it would be a long-term monitoring program so that we could really understand these big changes that are happening and also provide the kinds of data that local communities would need to help protect their lakes. So 8 times a summer across all New York State, all these volunteers, they get trained at the beginning of summer. In June, they start sampling, and it goes until October, I believe, or late September. And they're taking the same measurements. All these volunteers are trained in the same method. It's replicated as much as you can for volunteer samplers to try to make it comparable so they can do these big analyses of the entire state data set. They measure water temperature, water clarity, conductivity, pH, color, total phosphorus, nitrate, ammonium, total dissolved N, chlorophyll A, and calcium. These are some of just the key indicators that we should know about in order to understand the health of our lakes. So here's just a volunteer dropping a Secchi disc off the side of the boat. That is a measurement of water clarity. Has anyone used a Secchi disc before? Nice. Where did you get to use one? Nice. Cool.
Let your sister talk.
With this.
My environmental science class.
Yes. Very good. So was it with Discover Cayuga Lake's boat? Yeah. Nice. So basically, you're like lowering this disc down into the water, and as soon as you can't see the difference between the white and the black stripes anymore, you like start raising it back up, and you figure out that depth, and that gives you a measurement that you'd be able to compare. And it's advised that you have multiple people looking at it at once, just in case people's eyesight is a little bit variable. And this is like kind of just a scorecard of the information you can get from the CSLAP program. So this is for Cayuga Lake, all 4 of these. Here's the far north end. There's 4 sites. So the Cayuga Lake Watershed Network sponsors 4 sites on Cayuga Lake. We have the most sites out of any lake, but also we're a very long lake, and there's a lot of differences between the north, the middle, and the south end. So it's a good idea to be taking multiple measurements. And so far north, red, red's problem area, if you can't quite read it. Yellow is like, okay. Green is good. We have a little bit of good in terms of water quality indicators. But the biggest issue, right, is this phosphorus, especially in the north end. We have a eutrophic lake, right? So that is like more nutrients than should be there. We have a lot of, algae and chlorophyll A. The chlorophyll A measurement is higher. Let's see, there. And it's just trend over time, so an average year versus 2022. And the north end is shallower, and so like as you look at these, you start to see some differences. Like, oh, what does the land cover look like in the north versus the south end versus the middle? How deep is the lake? What are the plants? What's going on in the lake? And you start to build the story. And the north end, so far north, and then north end gets a little bit better. It's also a little bit deeper of a water body at that point. And then mid-south at Taganic, it's actually interesting. The lake perception. That's not like a science measurement. That's a social measurement. So it's asking, because of course the volunteers know their lake, right? And this is like, based on your perception, would you use this lake today? Would you go swimming in this lake today? And so it's kind of an interesting thing. And we do, that is one of the healthier areas of the lake. It looks like 2022 was a better year. And then the south end in Ithaca. And so mesotrophic is just it's between eutrophic, which is too many nutrients, eutrophic, and oligotrophic, which is not enough nutrients. And this is sort of a hard to look at slide, but basically all the sections of the lake are broken down into their best uses. So There's some which the best use is drinking water. Like, we know we want to be drinking water out of that part of the lake, so we're going to have higher standards for the water quality compared to other areas where maybe, you know, the best use is drinking water versus swimming or boating or fishing. And so there's like a little bit different way that we evaluate the parts of the lake based on how they're being used. And the south end, Class A, is, you know, evaluated as its best use as drinking water supply. And it is impaired, it's noted as impaired based on those scorecards for drinking water supply because of total phosphorus right now by the state. And there's, you know, big programs to sort of model this information and make plans to remediate it. And it's ongoing. It's been going on for 20 years, and we're hoping to see some more progress with it soon. But this is just a little example of like how the lake changes, right? It's so shallow at the top and then gets really deep, right? 435 feet deep, and then shallow again at the south shelf. And those are the areas which are having the biggest problems. And that's just it mapped out there. So the CSLAP program informs all of those evaluations, right, of the health of our lake over time, and it allows us to compare it to the rest of the state. But there's also these community-driven programs, community science programs. We do with our partners at the Community Science Institute, which is way more frequent sampling and informing users of the lake at any given time. You know, what is the scene with harmful algal blooms during the summer? And so there's a public health reason to be doing that, and then it's also pretty useful for understanding. It's a really rich data set for understanding the relationship between, you know, what the cyanobacteria are that we're seeing in the lake, what toxins are they creating, what's the relationship between those two, when do we see it peaking? And so through this monitoring program, which has been going on for over 5 years now, and is the most thorough HABs monitoring program in New York State, funded by the counties, because that recognized, you know, public health issue. There's over 80 volunteers now, I believe, that are all assigned a section of the shoreline and go out every week, and they do a survey. They're also trained in a repeatable way so that they can evaluate if there's a HAB occurring. And anyone can also report a HAB to the HABs hotline, which we help monitor during the summer, and then we'll send someone out to take a sample if it's confirmed that it looks like a bloom. And then all the data that gets sampled and collected by the volunteers gets rushed back to the CSI lab in Lansing, and they analyze it for lots of things. They analyze it for the cyanobacteria composition, chlorophyll A, microcystin levels, and they also record, you know, conditions out in the field, like they take the photos and the time and the date and the weather and other things like that. And I want to thank the faculty here who have helped me help coordinate getting samples back to CSI's lab, because this all is time-sensitive science, right? You need to get those samples analyzed within 48 hours if you actually want to have consistent understanding of what's going on in them. And it's also, you know, we have to be really careful with what we're asking volunteers to do, right? Because these are potentially toxic samples, and so they're really careful and trained and wear gloves and do all the right things so that we're able to get this data. And just if you're curious, so HABs reported on Cayuga Lake from 2018 to 2023. Here are the trends. But there's something a little bit tricky about understanding these, right? Because if you want to look at trends over time, there has to be the same effort every year. And so we have more and more volunteers every year. So this data set is not well suited to tell us in a scientific way that there are increasing HABs occurrences over time. However, as you know, there's things we can do, and I haven't seen this analysis done yet, but to normalize, right, these observations over time based on the number of volunteers or the effort that was being put into it, and that will help us communicate that a little better. But I just want to say, like, be careful with these things like trends if it's over time and the effort has changed. But that's why we say HABs reported, not HABs on Cayuga Lake. And we had a peak in 2021, and I think the sampling has been pretty consistent over the last 3 years. So this is the sort of thing you might go back in the data set, see what happened in 2021. Was it a weather thing? There was a huge late season bloom in 2021 in October. That was pretty unique, and since then actually we've been noticing the end of the HAB season sort of marching later and later into the year. Possibly related to climate change, possibly related to ecological dynamics going on in the lake. But it's all stuff we can work on. Some things you can tell really well from these data sets, because you're not looking at it over time, is actually just the correlation between chlorophyll A and microcystin toxin. So microcystis is the most dominant cyanobacteria in our lake, and you can see, when we're seeing microcystis dominant, you're seeing the most toxins as well. This slide looks a little like it lost a little bit of information, but I just want to point out that based on the HABs we're seeing in a given year, it's supporting this data that we're also seeing in the CSLAP data set, that the north end is really struggling with these. And that 44% of all the HABs that were observed last year were in the northern quarter of Cayuga Lake. So that's it for now on the story of the HABs monitoring program, but there's other programs going on. So not only are we documenting and working with partners to document the conditions in the lake, but we're doing monitoring upstream in the tributaries to try to understand the sources of that pollution, so that we can really hone in what management we're prioritizing to reduce pollution that's coming into the lake. So we just are wrapping up a study now with SUNY ESF funded by the Emerson Foundation that looked at nutrient concentrations in the northern tributary streams and paired this microbial source tracking, or MST, information. So we had a graduate student at SUNY ESF who would then go back and do an analysis to understand if there was a correlation with ruminant biomarkers, human biomarkers, dog biomarkers, avian, bird biomarkers, so that we can really tell the story of okay, now that we know there's this correlation between ruminant and phosphorus in these streams, let's focus on getting the farms that have cattle the resources they need to reduce inputs to the stream. So that data is not finalized yet, but we'll hopefully go out into peer review next year as Emma, the awesome graduate student who headed that effort, writes it up. And this is one of our volunteers, Tom Casella. Right, and just quickly, these are examples of great projects going on, because the soil and water conservation districts, which are in each county, are doing amazing work to try to improve conditions on the landscape that affects water quality downstream. Cayuga County Soil and Water Conservation District was recently awarded a $2 million grant from New York State for soil health. And a lot of those soil health practices, like cover cropping, directly impact, water quality downstream. So we're really excited about some of this work that's going on. And of course, there's things that everyone can do. So we're a member of the Lake Friendly Living Coalition of the Finger Lakes. And we try to educate community members, individuals, homeowners about things they can do at home to reduce pollution, because we all kind of have a role here, right? We all have our own resources and networks and things that excite us. And the goal is just to get people to tap into those things so we can collectively have the biggest impact. Right, and so we put out information every year about different things that community members can do to promote lake-friendly living, and you can take the pledge online, and it's free, and that shows your support. And we have cool swag that you get, and you can put it out at the end of your driveway or on your door, so it can start a conversation with friends and neighbors. about what you're up to. I'll just pitch that we are looking for volunteers for the HABS monitoring program this summer. Aurora is pretty well covered, but just north on the shore and south on the shore, there's a bunch of areas that we could still use some additional monitoring. Okay, this is the part where I just get to tell you about all the awesome opportunities there are. We actually don't have one this summer for Wells College students, but there are so many other cool organizations that have Watershed focus that are advertising internships right now. The first is through the Cayuga Lake Watershed Internship Program. So this is with our partners at Discovery Cayuga Lake, who have that cool boat that does the community programs and education, floating classroom stuff. They've actually got this cool setup where they're advertising 8 internships right now, some for them and some for other organizations, and all the interns from all these organizations get together throughout the summer once a week, and they get to do some, professional development, learn about the other organizations that they aren't directly working for. So we're a bit involved in this, and you can check out their website, discoverycayugalake.org, and the Watershed Internship Program. There's like 6 or 7 internships posted right now. Also, New York State Parks Recreation and Historic Preservation hires watercraft stewards and inspection. So basically, you get to hang out at the state parks all summer and talk to people going out the lake and help educate them about, keeping invasive species from being moved around our region. And they hire at Cayuga Lake State Park, in Deans Cove, Taganic Falls, and Allen H. Treman. And then the Finger Lakes PRISM, so that's the partner for regional invasive species management at the Finger Lakes Institute, is hiring many, many positions as well. They sponsor a lot of watercraft stewards throughout the Finger Lakes. For both the watercraft steward program, and then there's terrestrial field teams too. If you don't feel like you want to be in a boat all summer, but want to be getting out on the trails and helping survey and manage for invasive species up on the land, they are they have trouble filling all these positions. There's a lot of need. And coming up just in the spring, it's not an internship, but it's an opportunity to get involved, to get out in the watershed. We can help, the Cayuga Lake Watershed Network can help you organize a litter cleanup. Usually April and May, that's a good time. The leaves aren't out yet. You can see all the trash on the ground. If that is getting you down, talk to us, because we can set you up with all the stuff you would need to get out with friends, family, clubs. And there's 2 that are happening already up here in Cayuga County. So there will be one at Aurora Bay on Earth Day with the Cayuga Climate Action and Popular Friends meeting, volunteer crew, but everyone's welcome. And we'll have more details about that on our website and social media. And then at Frontenac Park, hosted by the town of Union Springs and the Park Commission, they always have a big event, and that's on May 18th. Okay, so with that, I just want to say thanks for hanging in here on this Friday. And you can follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Cayuga Lake Watershed. And we also have an email list with updates, and we do post internships and opportunities for students through that, in addition to just what's going on in the watershed and partner organizations. So yeah, stay in touch, stop by our office. And there's material in the back too if you guys want to take a newsletter or anything, or a map. Thanks. Wow, pushed it right to 120.
You didn't go into detail, but I'm just wondering, I asked the question when we did that, we posted the HABS career training program year, in the last May or June. I asked the question then, when the Harriers are collecting samples and their samples go down to CSI, they're just, you showed it, they're just looking at the microsystem.
They look at microcystin, and they look at the composition, the species composition.
What they don't look at, I asked the question, why don't, when you have a sample of lake water, why don't you do a phosphorus?
Right. Yeah.
coming back, I get that. My question is, I wasn't aware that there are that many sea slab people doing that kind of
Mm.
phosphorus assay, and I guess if
Mhm.
anybody looking at the overlap of the two, when you have something that spikes, if somebody
Yeah.
was doing a comparable sea slab take in the same, redo roughly the
Yeah.
same time.
Yeah, even if it's not perfectly aligned, I think there's a lot of opportunity with all of the data sets for Cayuga Lake, not only the in-lake data sets, but the tributary monitoring to really look at these data sets and learn more from them. I think they're just all underutilized. And that's something I'd like to get into and create a little more time for myself to do or find someone to do because there's a lot of value there. Yeah.
How would you like at a school, like what would you like to see from like a school organization, like or school setting to protect things like as we are right on the lake? What would you like to see from the students here?
Amazing. What a good question. I think that we could probably come up with some cool ideas to collaborate through classes in terms of helping, build our understanding for Cayuga Lake and its watershed. And then students, if students are interested in getting together and, creating a work group around a certain area, whether it be plastic pollution or sediment and nutrient reduction, or just climate communication, even in the relation to the lake and how climate change is affecting our lake over time. There's a lot of opportunities, and I think it's just what people are going to be excited about doing, and we'd be very happy to facilitate that through a club or a class or whatever it is. Thanks. You guys ready for spring break?
I got a bunch of questions. All right, so I took notes while I was just messing around with you. Okay, so my first question for you, the micro system.
Mm-hmm.
I know Cayuga Lake is big for fishing.
Yes.
So if there's a micro system in the lake, I would assume that isn't fish. Then I would assume that when people take the fish home, eat the fish, now it's getting to us. Is that true? Is there any kind of risk for eating fish?
I think there are risks for consumption. I don't know what analyses have been done that would show us what the actual, risk is. And I think it is so time sensitive too. And I don't know what how quickly a fish is able to, process or break down microcystin, what's in its body. I mean, there's a million questions that need to be answered about harmful algal blooms and the potential effect to human health and the ecosystem that just aren't answered right now.
So another question, get me back in the top.
Can I interrupt
Oh,
you?
yes,
I
yes,
think
yes.
there was a student question.
Oh, I'm sorry, yeah.
No, I
Students
just
first.
took you too.
On the chart that you showed of like all the different sections of the lake where it's like, oh, this is fair, this is good, like it's poor. On the portion, I think it was the north end maybe, but it said that it was like the word mistro. I'm not even sure. but that word-
Mesotrophic?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was the same on the average year and then also the same for like 2022, but then on one side it's like good and the other one was like fair. So what's the difference for when it's like perspective on the lake?
So for that perception
Yeah.
versus the actual like measured conditions in a scientific way, I'm not sure. That's a really good question. It might have to do even with like, I could imagine like, so there's that social question, what's your perception? And that might be impacted, even by things like waves or like sun that's like making the lake appear a little bit different than the conditions in the water actually reflect. I don't have a good sense of the how much you can really compare that perception value to the scientifically controlled measurements. But I think there's more on the CSLAP website about interpreting that, which would be good to go look at for sure. Yeah, that's such a good question. I mean, when you start mixing, you know, that social science and the physical science, things get really interesting really fast, and sometimes you can use stuff together and sometimes you can't. But good question.
So, we saw that chlorophyll was going on. But you also mentioned that these cyanobacteria eat it. We see that cyanobacteria is going on as well. So why?
The chlorophyll's in the algae and cyanobacteria.
Oh, so they go in hand in hand.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Those are super closely correlated.
Gotcha.
So sometimes you can do like it, you know, well, actually I don't want to about that. Yeah.
Not an ecologist. Don't know anything about this.
Yeah.
I know about nutrition. That's it. I also know that they mine under Cayuga Lake. I don't know if you guys knew this, but they mine under it for the salt in roads. Does that cause an effect on the lake at all? Or are they deep enough where it's not really having, I don't know.
Yeah, that is a big ongoing issue that we are looking to understand better, because not all of the information from the state that we would like to have about the permits and operations of the Cargill salt mine are available to us. The lake itself has become much less salty over time, because there have been environmental regulations, like since the 70s, that have been implemented. That means there's discharge limits and runoff limits for the surface operations of the mine into the lake. So you can see the trends, like, okay, we did something good, we saw it was a problem, we put a regulation in place, and you see an improvement. It's still one of the saltier Finger Lakes. Seneca and Cayuga are saltier. Part of that might be this legacy of industrial mining adjacent and under them, and also just the geology in the basin of the lake itself, causing higher salt levels because it's like intersecting with these layers. But there's a lot ongoing with the salt mine that we'd like to understand. And so that's part of the advocacy work that the network does, and we try to do science-informed advocacy. And so we write letters to the DEC, and we write letters to Governor Hochul, and we identify problems and where we need additional information, because for the salt mine in particular, there's never been a meaningful opportunity for community engagement through like an full environmental impact statement process where people are invited to make comment and ask questions, and it's this very public process that goes on in most environmental permitting, and the salt mines sort of just slipped through. Yeah.
Okay. I think we're just about out of time. Any final questions before we let them wrap it up? All right, let's give them one more round of applause.